Uh, uh, the Secretary from the Rural Development Department, Mr. S. N. Raju, is now here, and we'll be starting the session shortly.
So now, presentation number 3, short-term migration and rural employment guarantee, evidence from India by Clement, Imbert, Oxford University. He will going to deliver on this issue.
Hi, so I take this opportunity to thank the IGC team and for inviting me, both for inviting me and organizing this incredible and very good conference. I should also thank them for the financial support they brought to other projects than this, but that I also did. And thanks to the audience for being here early on a Sunday morning. So this project is still work in progress, so I really welcome your suggestions and your comments and questions. This project is on short-term migration and rural workfare programs, but I'm going to talk about the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. So it's a kind of a funny thing to be presenting it in Bihar, where there's a lot of short-term migration and arguably very little of Narega. So the motivation of this paper, as an economist working on migration, always comes back to the same kind of stylus fact, basically highlighting the presence and the persistence of large urban-rural wage gaps. And so in this context, and it's the case in many developing countries, maybe all, in this context, you really you expect labor to flow from rural to urban areas and kind of equalize the wages. So the very first and seminal paper was Iris Tordaro, and was highlighting that there was urban wage rigidity, so urban wages wouldn't adjust downwards, and but there was this large unemployment that kind of compensated for this very high urban wage gap, the fact that there was very low probability of actually finding a job and getting a job in urban areas. Looking at contemporary India, that doesn't seem to be kind of really fit. If you look at both the informal and informal sector, you can't really say that urban wages are rigid or that there's so much unemployment in urban areas. So where Kevin Munshi was here last year presenting on what could explain the persistence of these gaps in India, and he was highlighting the cost to permanent migration. So what could prevent rural workers to move permanently to urban areas, and it had to do with insurance, a lack of credit, imperfection of credit markets, and so on. So in this context, that's kind of the setting of how the economics literature is, where the economic literature is right now on migration. In this context, you could imagine that seasonal migration is just the magic bullet on that, because you have this urban-rural wage gap. So you live in rural areas, you go to urban areas, you get this high wage, and you come back, and you don't have to pay this cost to permanent migration. You don't have to relinquish your rights to your land. You don't have to, lose your informal insurance in the village. And so there's been a recent experiment in Bangladesh where they subsidized the tickets to the bus tickets to town for rural workers, and they found extremely big, large benefits of short-term migration, rising consumption, and for a long period of time, and they kept migrating, so that suggests that there are huge benefits to it. It's still a bit puzzling that people wouldn't have thought about it before in that sense. So this kind of opens more questions than it brings answers. One of the obvious kind of explanation for the fact that there isn't so much short-term migration in this context is maybe that there are costs that we don't measure. So there may not be immediate kind of monetary costs, but there may be utility cost of being away and like sleeping on the pavement for 3 months. So that's something I will touch upon in this paper. The other thing is, given that there is so little permanent migration and that short-term migration, seems an attractive alternative, you would expect short-term migration to be very important for urban centers and to be really vital in terms of fulfilling their need for labor, especially the needs for labor in sectors that are seasonal. And I'm going to talk a lot about, I think, construction also, construction work, for example. So, in the motivation, this is what you get when you use nationally representative data and you count the number of adults in India. And so rural India is like roughly 500 million, adults, so 15 to 60 year old. Urban India is 188 millions. So the straight arrows are permanent migration. So you see that there's 4.5, so roughly 1% of rural Indians, adults, moving permanently, changing residence and moving to urban areas. But at the other hand, you see that there's 2.5 million coming back, okay? So that's just 0.5 of the rural population moving every year to urban areas. And the circular arrow in the middle, and I put it in red because that's what I'm interested in, are those 8 million adults who, within the same year, leave rural areas, go to urban areas, and come back, okay? And the other thing I want to highlight is that, so as compared to permanent migration, it's sizable. What's also interesting, it's as compared to the size of the labor market in urban areas, it is also very important, because if you count the number of urban workers who declare themselves as being casual workers, so manual, unskilled labor, so those probably who will do the same kind of job as these short-term migrants from rural areas, they're only 15 million. So that means that, just it's very gross calculation, but just in terms of magnitudes, this short-term migration is maybe a third of the total workforce, manual, unskilled workforce in urban areas. So you would expect that, short-term migration is important for urban areas and urban labor markets. So what we do, and I think, in every paper on migration, the first issue is data. So it's, how to get the data. So what we do is to combine the national representative survey that is not, very detailed with a very precise survey on a small sample to understand better short-term migration in India. What we do is to try to evaluate and estimate the impact of the National Rural Employment Guarantee on migration. And so here, you could expect the effect to go in two directions. You could, could expect that people getting richer, if the problem is the cost of migration, they could finance the fixed cost of migration. They could finance migration thanks to the program, or maybe, if they're just happy to stay back and work on the program rather than migrate, you could expect a crowding out effect. So these impacts may go in both directions. The other thing we do is to look at having precise data on decisions, migration and participation decisions. We will be able to say something about migration costs. And here, the idea is that if people say prefer to stay back for 60 rupees than to go for 120, that means that the cost maybe should be as large as the difference. And the last thing we do, and that's probably the part that's a bit really primary at this stage, is to estimate the impact of the program via migration on urban labor markets. And it's kind of a $1 million question, so don't throw stones at me if the results are not perfectly convincing. So what we find is, so we document kind of high demand for public works in the lean season among migrants. So we document the seasonality of public works employment in Narayan that really matches the seasonality of migration. So both the program kicks in at the period where there's a lot of migration, and so it's not only seasonal, it's also the same people. So we can show that the migrants have high demand for the public works. What we're going to show is that we find less evidence that there's less migration in this district where there's more public employment provided in Narayan. And we find that the utility costs of a migration day, so the flow cost of migration has to be very high, maybe as high as 60% of daily earnings outside of the village to rationalize the fact that people prefer to stay back and that the program has this negative effect on migration. And the last finding is that we seem to find evidence that wages increase in urban centers that draw migrants from these places where there's more Narayan work. So so the roadmap, so I have actually, I may have too many slides for this presentation. So I think I'll try to focus on the context to, so that you really understand both, what we know, what we learned from the data on the patterns of short-term migration, and how the program, how Narayan is implemented, and how we can learn about the variation in implementation to say something about the effect of the program on migration. And then after, I'll have 2 slides each on the estimation of migration costs and the estimation of the impacts on urban labor markets. So a few words on the data we use. So the data on short-term migration in India, depending on if you do field work like Indrajit, you have some. But otherwise, the only source of information that's nationally representative, say, is the National Sample Survey, and that asks for 2 rounds, so 1999 and 2000 and 2007-8, questions about short-term migration. They are slightly different questions. So 2007-8 asks about 1 to 6 months away from the village in the last year, and 1999-2000 asks about 2 to 6 months away from the village. It would be too easy if the questions were the same. But so that's our measure of short-term migration nationally. But we also have this migration survey that my co-author John Papp did in a rural area spread across 3 states. And so those are village pairs, and they are at the border of these 3 states. And they were surveyed in the summer 2010, and then we have a lot of information, very detailed information about short-term migration trips. So that's just a general map of where short-term migration is taking place. And you see, in red, it's where it's big. It's, more than 5% of rural adults are short-term migrants, and the white places where there's nothing. And you see that, it's a very concentrated phenomena. So it's not happening everywhere. But obviously being in Bihar, it's very important. In Bihar, you can also see from this graph that you have the poorer regions, but also the regions where that are the driest and where there's the less likely to be a harvest or some agricultural work to do during the summer, during the hottest months. So the sample that was chosen for the migration survey, the detailed migration survey, that's the green square you see there, and that's a high migration area that's at the border of 3 states, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh. And those are the villages that were chosen. So they were matched, which means they were chosen ex ante based on census characteristics to be similar, and they were chosen by pair. And so there's one for each village in Rajasthan. There's one village in Madhya Pradesh or in Gujarat that's similar to it, and that we're going to compare it to. You'll understand the rationale of that in a minute. Let me give you a bit of descriptive statistics on migration. I realize it's a big table, but just looking at the first row, and that's something that you can't guess from the National Sample Survey that asks about the last year. You need detailed data on migration during each season to say something about the seasonality of migration. So the question I asked in June 2010, and the summer is April to June 2009. The monsoon is July to September 2009, and the winter is the remainder of the month of the year. So from November to January. So you see that there is a lot of migration during the summer. This is the fraction of adults interviewed in the sample that migrated. So that's 35% in the sample, which is obviously very high. It goes down by a lot during the monsoon, where there's much more agricultural work to do, and it goes back up during the winter, when the kharif harvest is done, and it depends whether or not you have some rabi season, some rabi harvest to do. If you compare it to what it is in the NSS, on average, over all India, this is only 2.5%. So we have a sample of very high out-migration. So I don't have time to go through everything, but just focusing on maybe on the summer month, which are 3 months, people go 300 kilometers away. The transportation cost is about 1 day of work at the destination area, and they stay on average for about 2 months. Okay? What is important is they have once there, they have no formal shelter. So they just sleep on the work site. No accommodation. The food is just a bivouac thing. Their destination is mostly urban, and in the sample, most workers work in construction, right? So I guess I don't know what's your prior on short-term migration. There is some short-term migration to rural areas for agriculture, but it's just a minority. Most of it is to urban areas, and in the sample at least, so it's 70%. In NSS, it's only 42%, but construction is a big sector where they go. In the NSS, the remainder is mostly to manufacturing. So if you ask migrants from this small sample, very backward area, skeletal tribes at the intersection of these three states, you ask them, where did you spend your summer 2009? That's the answer that you get. And obviously you see that those people are going all the way to Bangalore or to Bhubaneswar or to Punjab, but a lot of them are basically just going over the border to Gujarat and to the big manufacturing centers in Gujarat. So let me say a few words about Narega. I guess you all know about it, but I think it's important to understand both how the Act is and how it is implemented in practice, so that you understand what the identification strategy, how we think we can estimate the impact of the scheme on migration. So this is obviously an Act that guarantees 100 days of work to every rural household. And the construction is, so the work is manual construction work in public infrastructure. What is interesting for us is that most of the employment is provided during the lean agricultural season, which is the peak migration season, and that's no coincidence. It's mostly because the people, so the officers implementing the program are trying to avoid any competition with the peak agricultural season. Yeah. What is also interesting is that there is very large variation in implementation quality across states, and I will talk to you. So I will show you just in a minute how large it is. The last thing to know about the program is that it was implemented phase by phase. And so in red, you have the first phase, and those are the poorer districts of India. So you have 3 phases, and by the time of the 2007-8 survey, the first and second phase, first and second phase district had the program. What I will talk a lot about is the variation in employment provision by state, and that's, I guess, something you know if you've been in Bihar and if you've been in Rajasthan, which I've done fieldworks in both states, and if you compare the two, Rajasthan, for example, is a state where the fraction of time spent on public works by rural adults has gone from 0.5 to almost 2 between 1999 and 2007-8. So 2007-8 is after Narega was implemented in 2005. In Bihar, it's relatively small. So it goes maybe from 0.15 to 0.2. But there's no action going on in terms of Narega kind of increasing public employment there. So I will use this variation in the sense that I will be comparing states that are to the right of this graph that provide a lot of public employment under the Act to states to the left of this graph that provide much less employment under the Act. An obvious answer, an obvious reason why these states may provide more or less employment, for example, would be the level of poverty, that there's not so much demand for work for the states that provide less public employment. You can show that this is not true. So you can control for all the variables you want in terms of labor market conditions, poverty, agricultural conditions, and you will still have that that Gujarat, say, or Maharashtra are providing much less employment that they should, given their level of rural poverty and economic conditions, and that Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan are provided much more. The one way to see it is to, okay, so I don't have it here, but in this you can in the sample you can look at differences between Rajasthan Madhya Pradesh, which in the sample is providing a bit less employment, and Gujarat, which is providing almost no public employment. And you can look at the fraction of people who demand public works. And you can show that the demand is the same, but the supply varies a lot. So this is the variation I will use, plus the seasonality of public employment provision, because you see that the fraction of time spent on public works goes from 1.2 during the first quarters of the year to almost, to very little during the last quarters of the year. So that's the monsoon. As soon as the monsoon comes, the works close, and there's very little NREGA work going on. So this is the last slide on very descriptive statistics. But so here the idea is that across season, you can see that there is a lot of, so there's 40% of the sample that did some NREGA work during the summer, and it goes down to zero in the monsoon, and almost nothing in the winter. That the second line is the fraction of people migrating. So you see that during the summer there's both a lot of NREGA work and a lot of migration. What's interesting is that there is a lot of people who do both. And there are also people who say that they would have migrating if there was no NREGA work, and that because NREGA works, it's not everybody gets as much NREGA work as they wanted. You can show that most migrants would do more NREGA work, and that's going to be important for later. But basically, we have 35% of adults in the sample who migrated, and 30% migrated and would do more NREGA work if it was available. So that's really the indication that there's very high demand for public employment among migrants. So let me go to how we identify the impact of the program of the National Rural Employment Guarantee on migration. So we have two samples, so we're using two different strategies. In the small sample, the strategy is very straightforward in the sense that there is one state that provides much more employment than the others in the sample, which is Rajasthan. And in the areas of Madhya Pradesh that we're looking at that are in the sample, there's much less public employment going on. And in Gujarat, there's almost nothing. So we will compare the number of days of public employment provided in Rajasthan with Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. And we will compare the number of days spent migrating in Rajasthan as compared to Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. As a robustness check, because the villages in Gujarat, you can show that the villages in Gujarat are quite different from the villages in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan in terms of access to infrastructure, access to town or to basic infrastructure, which I think we control for, but we will just drop Gujarat and get the same result comparing only Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. And another robustness check is to compare migration levels before NREGA. So just quickly, on a basis of 6 days of public employment per rural adult in Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan provides 5 days more during the 3 months of the summer. There's no difference in the monsoon and winter. If you look at the effect on number of days spent away in migration days, on the basis of 24 days, so the average per rural adult in Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, people living in villages on the other side of the border in Rajasthan spend 7 days less, or 8 days less. So you can show that this decomposes into both an extensive margin and an intensive margin, so less people migrating, and people conditional migrating, people going for less number of days. So another way to establish the impact of the program on migration is to use the national representative data, which has the advantage of having some pre-program, so some data on 1999-2000 when NREGA was not implemented. So we can compare the number of public work days and short-term migration in states that provide more or less employment, in the districts that are selected for the first phases of the program, if you remember. So bear with me, I'm going fast here. But so you have basically in India in 2007-8, you have some districts that have been selected to have the program, some districts that have been selected to get it later. And within those who have been selected to get the program, you have some that are in states that actually provide public employment and states that don't. So this is the variation I showed you before. So the idea is to compare public work day and short-term migration in early phase district, in late phase districts, so in districts that have supposed to have the program and that are not supposed to have it. In star versus other states, star states are those seven states that provided more of the program. As a robustness check, you can do the same comparison in before the program was implemented in 1999-2000, and you can also put the two together and compare changes in public work days and changes in short-term migration in these districts. So if you do this for the number of days spent on public works, so looking at the first column, this is saying that so the mean in late phase districts, which are districts that are not supposed to have the program, in states that don't provide the program, have a mean of 0.005% of time spent on these public works. In early phase, so these districts where the program is implemented, you have that jumps to 0.20. So we are talking about 0.2%. So it's a very small fraction of time spent on public works. In the states that provide more of the public works, but Narega is in districts where Narega is not implemented, that jumps to 0.50, so 0.5, which is so the average that I showed you before. But in states that are in districts that are supposed to receive the program, in states that are very good at providing public employment, that's where the number of the fraction of time spent on public works really jumps to 2%, roughly 2% of total time. And if you look at the difference in 1999-2000, where before the program was implemented, there's no significant difference in this district. If you do this as in comparing changes in these various districts, you see that this only place where there has been a significant increase in time spent on public works is on early phase district in star states. Yes. Yes, I should have said it. That's the missing part of that. So okay. So the early phase districts are phase 1 and 2 in this map. So those are the districts that were selected to receive Narega in 2007-8. Yeah? The star states are the 7 states to the right of this graph that provide more public employment. Okay? So the place where you would expect some effect of Narega are districts that were selected to benefit from the program. The other districts just don't have it yet. In states that provided public employment, where public employment did increase significantly. So this is two things. So you don't expect anything to happen in districts either that did not have the program yet, or the district that were selected to have the program, but that were in states that didn't provide any public employment. Yes, thank you for asking. That was a fact. Okay. So, yeah, okay. So, I don't know where I started, but I probably have 5 minutes left. I have 5 minutes left. How are we doing on time? Yeah, okay. So the last column of this is to say that there is an increase in time spent on public works in this early phase district in star states, so which is what you'd expect. Now, looking at the effect on the probability of migrating for in the last year for rural adults and focusing on the last column, you see that early phase districts, which are districts that were selected for the program but did not get any public employment, their migration increased. You see that in star states, which are states that provide a lot of public employment, but not in districts where the program was active, you have an increase in migration. However, in the districts where the program was both active and public employment was actually provided, you don't have this increase in migration. So this is on a moving basis, because migrate over the course of this period, migration, short-term migration is increasing in other areas. The places that got more of the public works program don't have this increase. So this is evidence, similar to the cross-sectional, so the comparison of states across the border that I showed you before. This is evidence that the scheme is dampening short-term migration. Okay, so I have 5 minutes, so let me try to just explain quickly the idea about migration costs. So here in our sample, so the effect of the program can be decomposed in two. One is the effect that it may make people stay back, so not migrate at all, or it may make people decide to go, but for shorter trips. So here, for the sake of brevity and simplicity, we will just focus on the people who are migrating. Yeah, so they have migrating during the summer 2009, and we will use the fact that some of them say that they would have liked to work more for Naraga, and some others don't. And the idea is that for those people who have migrating, if they say that they would have liked to work more for Naraga, it means that for them, in terms of utility, the benefits of staying back and doing Naraga work are higher than the benefits from being out of the village and working. Yes? So a simple way to look at this is to compare the number of, so what are the earnings per day away? So this is not the number of the earnings per day worked. Here we just take the total number of days that we have seen them migrate, and we have the total earnings that they got from this migration trip. We divide one by the other, and we have the earnings per day away. And we have we know how much they would earn for Naraga, because the wage is the same for everyone, but we do this using linear predictions if we have missing data. The difference is about 36 rupees. So earnings per day away is 100 rupees, and the Naraga daily earnings is 62 rupees. For people who say they would want more Naraga work, and the difference is 36 rupees. For people who say they do not want more Naraga work, the earnings per day away are higher, and the difference is larger, which is what you would expect. Is, people are just trading off one wage over the other. So there are two things to take away. One is that people who earn more from migration, are less likely to say they would want Naraga work, which is what you would expect. The other thing to take away is that people who say they would want more Naraga work actually, are ready to incur an income loss, because the earnings per day away that they would get if they migrated is much higher than the wage on the public works. And so if you put that with a bit of structure, you can show that this may imply that the migration cost is about 60 rupees on average in the sample, which would mean on a basis of 102 rupees per day away, that the migration cost may be as high as 60% of the days the earnings per day away. So I hope that so the numbers you could get slightly different if you made different assumptions, but here the bottom line is in order to explain the fact that people prefer to stay back and do Naraga work rather than migrating, in this sample, and given what we know about their earnings in both situations, you need very high migration costs. And this high migration cost can't be explained in monetary terms, because it's not going to be the ticket, or it's not going to be accommodation. The cost of accommodation has to be a high non-monetary utility cost. And lastly, to conclude, I will just shortly talk about the urban impact. So what we do is to use NSS survey to build a map of migration flows across districts. So here is the picture that you get, otherwise it gets too messy, at the state level. And so here are the short-term migration trips that we observe. So as you see, Bihar is sending a lot of migrants. So the red arrows are the migration flows that cross state borders, and the green ones are within states. So Bihar both has a lot of migration within the state, and is sending a lot of migrants so as you see, to Delhi, to Maharashtra. So here it would be mostly Mumbai. You see the migration flows I've been talking about in the small sample, which is Madhya Pradesh to Gujarat and Rajasthan to Gujarat as well. So here the idea is that we want to look at the wage dynamics in urban centers that receive migrants in general, and in particular that receive migrants from these these districts where we know that more Naraga work was provided. And so here the idea is that we will predict So using a gravity model, we will predict where migrants should go, so how many migrants should come to every urban center, and see what is the wage dynamic in the centers where there's more, we predict more migrants should come from early star, so districts where there's more public employment.
To introduce the Clement Imbert. He is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Economics and Fate College, Oxford University. His fields of interest are development economics, labor economics, public economics, and political economy. Clement has worked extensively on various projects in India, broadly in the field of rural development. Thank you. And next presentation is by Indrajit Roy. I would like to introduce Mr. Indrajit Roy. He is a research fellow with the Oxford Department of International Development, and his interests include processes of social change, migration and development. In the long term, he intends to research social and political transformations in a...
On the second day, on a Sunday morning, and thanks to IGC for inviting me to speak. What I'm going to be presenting today are really extracts from previous and ongoing work on migration, on labor migration in particular from Bihar. This is very much work in progress, and a lot of it draws on my previous doctoral research, which I conducted in rural Bihar. Now that that project, the doctoral project is over, the book is likely to be out soon, I can concentrate more on this project on migration, for which I'm very grateful that IGC has contributed. I've also got some funding from the Economic and Social Research Council, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to put something really nice together. A lot of my work is ethnographic in nature, so I would like to alert and sort of caution people that there are not too many statistics in my presentation. What my paper tries to do, or rather what I try to do through my paper, is to intervene in the debate that often has in the migration literature between the optimists and the pessimists. So you have migration optimists who would say that, well, migration is all good because it results in the equalization of the allocation of the factors of production. On the other hand, you have pessimists who would say migration is terrible because there's a brain drain and there's a brawn drain and there's significant amounts of unemployment that migration reflects. In fact, a lot of the conversations I've had in the state of Bihar with activists and with officials in the government has to do with the Hindi for migration, which has often been used. The word often used that I've been told is palayan, which, as far as I can see, doesn't quite translate into, isn't quite a translation of the word migration. The term palayan really has to do with forced migration or distress migration. But I think the understanding has been that migration that happens from Bihar is a reflection of something terrible. So it's critiquing both these predominant views. What I'm trying to do is to call for a more realistic interpretation of the migration process. Migration is extremely heterogeneous, and the experiences of the migrants themselves are very, very varied. They differ tremendously. I think this does fit in with the IGC mandate, which is going to have to deal with growth challenges in the state of Bihar, particularly as the state develops and there's a greater level of migration from rural to urban areas within Bihar, some of which I've had the occasion to notice and I will present to you. So, for this paper, the methodology, what I'm going to draw on is survey work that I did in 2010, as well as an ethnography in select wards of 2 purposively selected panchayats. This was the survey covered about 2,200 households conducted in 2010. While the survey questions focused largely on poverty, and there was only one question on migration really, but that allowed me to have a lot of conversations on this subject since 2010 and thereafter. I've been going back to the villages every year and have been able to develop a rather a preliminary ethnographic sketch of select households, which I'll talk to you briefly about. This work obviously continues. So in the survey question, the question that related to migration was very specific. Has any of your family members migrated or lived outside the district, was the specific word we used, during the previous year? And if the answer was yes, what was the purpose? And we tried to classify the purpose in the following manner. So we tried to see if the purpose of living outside the district was temporary seasonal employment, was it other temporary casual employment, other reasons, or whether people had permanently migrated and that's why they had gone to live outside. Very briefly, so from the data that we gathered in these two panchayats, 44% of the households said that at least one member had migrated. And from within these households, we have over half the households saying that those who had migrated were predominantly engaged in casual employment. Now, obviously, from households that send migrants outside, migrants are not all employed in one stream. One goes to the village, the other goes to a town, a third goes for something else. So we tried to see what proportion of the economic remittances really came from these different sources, and that's the way we tried to classify these responses. So over half the people who said they'd migrated were engaged in some kind of casual employment that was not seasonal in nature, which meant they were engaged primarily in construction sector work or in brick kilns or in the textile industries in Delhi, but also in cities like Varanasi or Ranchi. There continued to be seasonal employment opportunities that people sought in Punjab and Haryana, but this was less than what we see in terms of casual employment seekers. So that's the overall picture. There's a great deal of very specific socioeconomic profile of the migrants that's there in the paper. In case you're interested, you could ask me or ask the conference organizers. I've shared a copy of the paper with them. But what I do want to do now is to focus on the ethnographic portrait of the migrating households. And there's one particular family that I want to draw everyone's attention to, whose sort of family history and personal histories I've been trying to chart. So this is 3 generations of a family with migrants to different sectors and different regions of the country. The data was gathered by, well, very classic ethnographic methods: hanging out, interviews, observations. The broad trends, if I could say, so there were 3 families that I'm trying to develop a portrait of, one of which I will describe in detail, but the 3 families were, just to sort of indicate the broad trends. There was one of the families is Musahar, which is the Mahadalit, which is a Mahadalit caste. They're Dalits, an extremely impoverished group. That's the household I'm going to talk in greater detail about. But there's also 2 other communities from which I selected one household each. So the Musahar household in the first generation, that is people who started migrating in the 1990s, there was a great deal of emphasis on migration, circular migration from rural Bihar to rural Punjab or Haryana, engaged mostly with agriculture. Thereafter, it emerges that those who migrated in the previous decade were engaged mostly where people who migrated from rural Bihar to look for employment opportunities in urban Delhi or urban Varanasi or Ranchi, etc., engaged in the construction sector and other linked sectors. The third generation, people who are migrating now, it seems, and this is one family, obviously more data is required, that there is rural to urban migration, but instead of going out to Delhi or Varanasi, they're trying to come to Patna or Purnia or Katihar, so cities within Bihar, again engaged in construction or similar activities. Among Muslims, that is the KU1 and KU2, so these are Kunjra Muslims. So in the families that migrated in the 1990s tended to go to Delhi. There was no rural to rural migration, apparently. And they were mostly engaged in the garment sector in Delhi. Increasingly, there's rural to urban migration again, people still going to Delhi, but not working in the garment sector, rather setting up their own sewing units. Again, that has to be explored in greater detail. The third family that I was looking at was Kewat. They are classified as extremely backward class in Bihar. There again, we have rural to rural migration in the 1990s, people going to Punjab and Haryana quite a bit. For agriculture, but increasingly it seems there's rural to rural migration within Bihar. So there's more of agricultural work in other districts such as Purnia and Bhagalpur. That's what came up. Anyway, now if I can come back to the family that I was talking about and that I was specifically interested in. When we talked about what compelled or what led family members to migrate. I went with the idea that it would be, because I used the term palayan and I talked about what compelled people to migrate out of the village. The narratives that came up were that back in the 1990s, my interlocutor, my respondent spoke about their father's generation and the reason they migrated. And they prefaced their account with a great deal of an emphasis on the lack of dignity of work in the village. And I found this very interesting because they weren't saying that there was no employment in the village. They were saying that the work that they did in the village wasn't remunerated socially. There was narratives about how the farmers, the employers, wouldn't come and sit with us. They would employ us, but not treat us with respect. The talk of wages did make an appearance, but it wasn't the singular cause, it seems, that people, the people left the village to look for work elsewhere. When they talked about the experience of this person's father, whose quote I've put up on the slide, when he spoke about his father and him having gone to work in Haryana, they said that in Haryana the farmers treated my father with a great deal more of respect. They would actually come and bring food. My father didn't have to ask for food. There was chai that was being made regularly and provided, whereas back here we have to haggle for these little things. So what I'm trying to say is we often talk about the migration experience as something that is motivated economically. That's not wrong. There is a great deal of economic impetus to migration. But there's also these social factors that one needs to take very seriously. And if one talks with migrants themselves, the term palayan, for instance, was not used even once. They didn't see themselves as running away. They were very offended when I said, "Kya aapne palayan kiya?" Because for them it was an indication that they had fled the village. And they said, "Of course not. We are not. There's no question of fleeing the village. You go and live in England. Have you fled?" And so this was this conversation that happened back and forth. I did talk about wages being important, not perhaps singularly important, but important. And I think what does come up again from the narratives is the narratives of those who migrated in the 1990s as well as those who migrated in the last decade, is migration is often associated with a sense of economic autonomy. So yes, there is the question of dignity, and there is the question of economic autonomy, to which I would now like to turn. So if one speaks to local hirers of labor, there's a constant complaint of labor shortages. Now one might argue that of course local employers will always complain of labor shortages. They do that all the time. But it's very interesting when the local hirers of labor actually try and tell you what changes have happened in the village over the last 2 decades. And they talk about how back in the day, when this person whose quote I've now put up, his father all he would have to do is to ask for work for laborers to come, and hundreds would turn up the night before the actual work was to be done. And they would sometimes sleep outside the house in the chilling cold, hoping to get some work, and there would be a great crowd that would gather. So it was really a buyer's market, I suppose, in a way. What's happening now is that my father, of course, in the last decade, he says, my father would ask for workers to come, nobody would turn up. And then I would have to go and bring workers to do the work that I wanted them to do. And today, then he talks about the present day, he says that it's impossible to actually get anything done. And the quote is, I think, quite vivid in terms of how it's not only workers who become more recalcitrant, but when workers come and work on their fields, they actually get phone calls from their relatives or friends outside who tell them, apparently, according to the employer, why are you working there? Why don't you do something else? What's the purpose of working there? Isn't there anything else to do? Now, these seem to be very, very anecdotal sort of quotations, etc. But I think what's interesting in all of this is the way in which the way in which certain ideas are circulated. And I think far too often the work on remittances focuses only on the economic remittances, the cash that comes back to the village. If one looks at social and political remittances, then it's very fascinating to see how economic autonomy is actually buttressed with these social remittances. The idea that Musahar workers ought not to be working on the fields of Yadav farmers or on the fields of anyone else's farmers, but do something else, be a shop assistant or engage in rural construction work that is happening quite a bit in some of the areas, or go to the nearby towns and work. But don't demean yourself and don't talk about working on the farms of somebody else, seems to be the ideas that are being circulated. There are a lot of other ways in which economic remittances do support social remittances and cultural remittances. So the monies that come from the farmers, from the migrants, have been used to organize festivals, festivals that were hitherto not permitted to be organized. So the Musahar community organizes something called a Dina Bhadri festival, which has traditionally been restricted to the Musahar hamlets. But it was told to me that once they began to go to Punjab and they had more money and more economic autonomy, they were actually able to push for this festival not to be a hamlet-specific festival, but something that was organized in the village, in the main square of the village. Obviously, there were costs involved, both economic and social, which members of the Musahar community were able to meet. Again, this is not to say that remittances is what has solved the problem. There are a great deal of other endogenous factors within Bihar that have contributed to assertions by Dalits and other communities. But I think it's interesting how the respondents themselves would look at the experience of going to Punjab and Delhi and relate that with cultural assertions. Gender relations is another sphere in which there is a great deal of discussion about how migration might or might not affect gender relations within the house. So in this particular family, the experience of migration meant two things. One, there was coming in. Secondly, women were left with managing the household and doing things that they would not probably have been able to do before. But what a lot of observers might say was on the flip side is when the economic remittances came in, there was an emphasis on engaging in activities like rearing of animals such as goats, and there was a great deal of discussion I've had in the paper about this particular set of goats that this family purchased. But in terms of women's mobility, there was some evidence that if we look at mobility simply in terms of women going out to work, that had reduced because instead of women having to go out and work on the farms of the local farmers, the fields of the local farmers, they were now at home rearing animals. Sociologists of gender might suggest that this actually represents a restriction of the women's economic sphere because they're not able to go out and do things of their own. But when I spoke to some of the women from this community, they saw their able to rear goats as a symbol of an autonomy from the drudgery of having to go and work on somebody else's land. So they didn't see their present experiences as something that was inhibitive. Rather, they said that this was something that freed them up from drudgery. It also prevented them from being leered at and leched at by the local employers, saved them from taunts that they were often subjected to. So this is one way in which one could say that there has been some kind, and I don't want to use terms like women's empowerment or gender empowerment, but certainly there has been some kind of an influence on gender relations that have changed. But is migration the panacea then? And I think increasingly there was a great deal of enthusiasm, obviously, about the reason, about people leaving the village. But those who've continued to migrate, and especially those who've been migrating in the last decade or so, talk about their freedom as being something very, very, they're very ambivalent about their freedom. So this particular quote, for instance, talks about how this person says, yes, he's free from all of these local relations of servitude, but he's free to then go and live in exactly the same conditions in the village, in the city. And then he concludes by saying that if he died the next day, nobody would care, neither the contractor, nor the co-workers, nor the government. So there is an ambivalence relating to the process of migration. It's not entirely an optimistic notion either. There's no undue pessimism, because even this person does not say that he wants to stay on in the village. What he is looking at is going to the village, going to the city, and perhaps having a different kind of economic assertion and social assertion. So when we spoke about present-day migration and people who, what sort of changes have happened now, and a lot of the members of the family that have been looking at their present destinations appear to be within the state of Bihar. So it doesn't mean that everyone sort of come to Patna. Migration is also a risk diversification strategy. So some folks continue to go to Delhi, but some have begun to come to Patna, which is very different from what one heard in the previous generation. In the previous generation, if one said we're going to Patna to work, the understanding was, oh, they were going to be rickshaw pullers. But now there is an understanding that if they're going to Patna to work, they are actually taking part in the construction sector or the brick kiln workers. Not that that's necessarily a much more, sort of the standard of living is much higher, but it's very different. And I think if one looks at the figures, from the economic survey, one does get a sense of how the construction sector has really boomed. And I think as a proportion of the GDP, the state's domestic product, it's much higher than the proportion of the construction sector to the country's GDP. But what also comes up in a lot of the narratives is the lack of social security. So the fact that migrants are often having to live in very, very difficult circumstances, not knowing enough about social security schemes, or social security programs simply not, they're not being aware of these schemes. There are social security schemes. None of my informants were informed about it. But the state government did say, give me figures which I've put in the paper about how many people had had accessed these services. Now, what is interesting is that all of these schemes are really to do with death or accidents. But that's not the only experience migrants are likely to have. Migrants are not able to carry their ration cards with them when they actually go to the urban areas. And there is some sort of discussion perhaps necessary for a kind of social protection, social welfare scheme for migrants when they come to urban areas. So, yes, can I just have one more minute, because this is the last slide. So I think a lot of this discussion has already been talked about in terms of the number of internal circular migrants. There are estimates that go up to 100 million. As well. But I think what I would like to mention is no matter what the figure, the total figure is, no matter what the macro figure is, one does have to be realistic about what to expect from migrants. So while I think naive optimism is misplaced, undue pessimism isn't necessary either. There is a great deal of positive feedback effects of the migration process. But I think what one is really looking at is to make life easier for migrants, as comes out from the narratives themselves. Framing policies in terms of preventing migration might be problematic, but one can make sure that migrants are not unduly advantaged. And I think key to this is to ensure that existing labor legislations are in place. Key to this is to ensure portability of rights, and I think that's what I'd really like to conclude with. When migrants leave, they should be able to carry their entitlements from their origin areas to their destination areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I must say that I really enjoyed reading Clement's paper. It was...
And its research interests includes open economy, macroeconomics, growth and structural change, political economy of growth and development, and international trade and financial markets. He holds a PhD from the JNU, New Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The reason I enjoyed it was it's been so carefully constructed. And it tries to go into the issue of whether Nariga, in a completely non-ideological fashion. And that's truly something that I enjoyed in the paper. Before I get into some issues that I have with the paper, a couple of things I want. Clement, you begin by saying that there's about 15 million is the size of casual labor in urban areas. Now, my understanding is that this might be an understatement, partly because there's a high degree of self-employment in urban areas. Some of that self-employment is actually casual labor done on piece rate. Yeah? So when you get that, now why it matters to your argument is essentially what you're saying is that about 50% of the casual labor force is, migration is about 8 million and this is about 15 million, so it's substantial in terms of wage effects. Right? So if you want to make that argument, though I don't think it's necessary for you to make that argument, if you want to make that argument, you must get into the self-employment and get an estimate over there. But that's a small point. Now, I think I'd like to draw your attention to 2 or 3 very important issues that outcomes of Clement's studies. First, the standard argument against Nariga is that it screws up the labor market because it works during peak season. Now, what Clement and Papas, I think it is, the two of them are able to demonstrate it's off-peak. And that's very, very important for labor market dynamics. Second, that the decision to migrate is not a simple decision in terms of wage differential, right? So we're not in the Harris-Tudara world. I've never liked Harris-Tudara as a framework of looking at migration, and the two of them demonstrate very clearly that migration will not happen in the face of substantial wage differences. And I think this is very, very important. Now, and to that then, Nariga becomes a very interesting addition. See, it raises the cost of migration, right? And therefore keeps back. So the dynamics over there again is very interesting. So for all of these reasons, I think it adds to the literature on migration and on Nariga in ways that it's not there in the current discussion and analysis. So thank you, Clement. Now, having said that, let me tell you where I have some reservations about the paper. Now, where I come from, which is looking at agrarian dynamics, dynamics of production and so on and so forth. So what's missing in my understanding in Clement's paper is this agrarian dynamics. Now let me give you two or three examples of what I'm trying to say, right? Now, there is no agrarian crisis reflected in Clement's work. Now, why is the agrarian crisis important? Now, in the states that Clement has picked up, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh is a very high farmer suicide state. Rajasthan is a very low farmer suicide state. Both Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh have very high non-food intensity of cultivation. Right? So what is happening? What we know from analysis is the fact that farmer suicides are high in areas that have high intensity of commercial cultivation, are arid, and so on and so forth. Now, typically that should add to migration effects. Second, even though they didn't study it, the area which has very high migration, which is in the northeast, in Bihar and Orissa, etc., actually has very low commercial cultivation, but very high levels of migration. Now, where is the impact on that? Third, in Bihar, in Jharkhand, in the last 10 years, you've actually got a decline in total cropped area. A decline, a contraction in total cropped area suggests a distress in agriculture. All right? Now, these kinds of dynamics will almost certainly have an impact on migration, will have an impact on Nariga. And I'd like to sort of draw Clement's attention to that. Hopefully, if he can sort of bring that in, it would enrich an excellent study. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohanty sir. Now, I am requesting Mr. Alakh Narayan Sharma. And I would like to introduce Mr. Sharma sir. He is the director of the Delhi-based Institute of Human Development. And Professor Sharma has worked extensively on issues related to Bihar and holds a keen interest in the process of migration.
Let me at the outset say that I also enjoyed reading the paper of Indrajit Roy. Very absorbing paper indeed. Though he has taken only a small sample of one block for his quantitative analysis, and the ethnographic study of detailed ethnographic study of one family and two other families he have also touched. But it largely captures the reality migration story of northeast Bihar, most of the realities. So, in fact, IHD has also done recently some study on agrarian change, including migration, and some of the findings of Indrajit overlap with our study. What I will do in my 10 minutes, that while I will give some specific comments on his paper, I will also share with you the findings of our study, because that will be very useful for him also in revising the paper and enlarging the scope of the study if he feels. First of all, I believe that migration is the most important change agent in Bihar. During last 30 years or more so in last 20 years. Indrajit has taken the study, his paper, the survey part. I will give him some suggestions with regard to conceptual factors. First of all, I think like the earlier first paper, you have not made this distinction between duration of migration, whether it is short duration, medium duration, long duration. You have just gone by seasonal and casual. Many of the seasonal workers will also be casual. So you should categorize this category, occupation category, into casual, regular, as is the usual workforce labor survey shows that. So that is my one suggestion about it. If you do it by duration of migration, that will capture a very powerful factor. You have rightly captured dignity aspects, also its impact, cultural assertions, and I am amazed that with 2-3 stories, you have really captured so many factors. But let me tell you that there are several other aspects which have not been captured, and maybe it is possible for you, since it is an ongoing study, to capture one. I just said that duration of migration is one important aspect. The other aspect that you have, somewhere you have said in your paper, that there is hardly any difference between educated migrants and uneducated migrants. Although you have given the caution, in our study, we found that as the education increases, the propensity to migrate also increases. In fact, in ISD study, including Purnia and Araria, we found that if a worker is more than 30 years educated, the propensity to migrate is 3 times higher than someone who doesn't have any qualification. So this is a very important. The other important trend is let me also share with the trend of migration, what we have observed, which has not been possible for you. Maybe, I don't know how we will capture it, but our study, since it is a longitudinal study, in fact, the first survey was done when myself and Sehwal were in India Institute, and he was also part of the study. Since then, rate of migration has considerably increased. Now, so much so that from Araria Purnia, which is really one district, geographically it is divided, the migration is something like 70% now, with at least one migrant from one household. In Madhubani, it is something like 80%. All Bihar, it is 58%. We have calculated something like 1.75 crores people have migrated from Bihar outside. The other aspects, since your limitation is that you have, and it is bound to be in any ethnographic study, since you have taken one Muslim family, one Kumhar, one artisan family, one Kewat, and one Mushahar. What has happened over the period, that people from all castes have migrated. In fact, in our study shows that Muslims have the highest propensity to migrate, followed by upper caste. This is not widely known. And in fact, lowest propensity to migrate is from OBC2, which is middle caste, because so what is happening, that attachment to land is an important factor in deciding migration. Since OBC2, by the way, land is in Bihar, and also because of migration, not only because of migration, is being transformed from upper caste to middle caste. There may be other factors, but migration is one factor. So much so that, just to give you one stance, in 1981, the difference between a Bhumihar, Rajput, the two important landlord castes, land holding and Yadav was 3 times. Yadav, Bhumihars and Rajputs possess 3 times higher land. Now difference is only 30%. You can imagine the amount of transfer which has taken place here. Because Bhumihar, upper caste are migrating more, OBC are migrating less, so all these things are happening. Similarly, class, but landlord class, I don't mean big landlords who are supervising the farms, their propensity to migrate. So all these factors, I think, I don't know whether you will do with qualitative studies through focus group discussions, or you will refine your survey, but this dynamics is to be the most important thing. The impact factor of migration, as I said in the beginning, it is not a small impact. This is the most important close to 2 crores people migrating. 60% of households have at least one migrant. This is a 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It has changed the entire rural landscape of Bihar. NSS data have said that not much job has been created in Bihar in spite of growth rate. So migration is the most important factor which has also reduced poverty. So just let me share with you some impact of migration which our surveys have shown and which in your survey, since you have already done some survey and it is ongoing, around 29% of the now total rural income of the state, Bihar as a whole, is derived from remittances. 29%, as high as that. And for poorer groups, it may be 60%, 70%, since it is average. This is just saying the impact on that you have in your survey as well as in your focus ethnographic. You have just tried to see what kind of use they make. But unless until you disaggregate it further, but most important in the labor market. Look, in a spite of, our survey in even 1989, before this growth took place, wages were rising. Just imagine in your district, Araria and Purnia, wages have risen in 30 years from more than 3 times. On current price, just to give you, on current price, it was 34 rupees in Purnia. Now it is 90 rupees, 93 rupees. Just imagine. And all over Bihar. So from the region where, the region which is stagnating, such a phenomenal increase in wages because of shortage of labor, migration, bargaining power, all this. The other thing I just tell you, also it has impacted tenancy. Since upper castes are migrating more, obesity are here, so there is somewhere also trend of reverse tenancy. And now tenancy is more being governed by market relations compared to semi-feudal production relations, all this. So I think all this has a very significant implications. In fact, semi-feudal production relations, which our teacher, myself, my teacher as well as Sabal's teacher, Professor Pradhan Prasad used to say, and we also subscribed that time, that has completely disappeared in rural Bihar. And most important factor is migration, to some extent, peasant movement, Nakshal movement, and all that. So this fascinating story of migration, I think, need to be captured. You have captured a lot, you have done a lot of work. It can't be done only by ethnographic study, both by quantitative and qualitative. And Araria story is one story. As I said, Araria story is different from now South Bihar is also has shown a lot of migration. So all this story through a structured survey plus also your powerful ethnographic study and qualitative will be able to throw sufficient light. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharma sir. Now, I will open to the audience for question and answers on this issue. 5 minutes. Yeah.
Rakesh Tiwari. Definitely this migration has been a very interesting topic, and Dr. Alakh explanations on the in Bihar case or pan-India phenomena also, how it's linked is very enriching views that he has given. My views are on 2 points. First presentation. This, and I will like to take a point from Mr. Mohanty, that the destination, the source regions that Clement has picked up is largely tribal dominated area. This Bhil population, I have worked there on migration issues. And definitely the agriculture structure or ecology plays a very important role there. These are tribal dominated places, Bhil population, small assets, land, and largely rain-fed areas. And I'm talking about districts of Dahod, Dungarpur of Rajasthan, Ratlam of Madhya Pradesh. And asset structure makes a large difference. If small, so you need to see the asset structure of source regions, the families you are discussing, the amount of land they are holding, those who are migrating, and how much are the irrigated land. So as your data shows, the monsoon season migration, the stay is longer, or they stay in the village, and in the Rabi season and the third crop season, they largely migrate. It's largely because there is no irrigation availability is there. So wherever there is a possibility of second irrigation, or there's a Rabi irrigation, the families, my study in those areas showed that if there is an irrigation facility, the family would stay longer in the village. So third, there comes the question of what are the other interventions than NREGA. Community organizations have done a lot in natural resource management in these areas. So one factor would be NREGA, or besides NREGA, you have to look into the irrigation facilities of those villages. So it will make a big effect on the duration of the stay of the households. And my study also, in fact, gave me this insight that longer the distance of I'm talking about circular migration, longer the distance of migration, larger the stay in terms, because obviously the transaction cost of coming back to the village each time is higher. So you need to, in fact, also take into this account.
So, I mean, I can answer very quickly. So, indeed, in the sample, there's both. So, those regions that we're looking at, those particular villages, both have low irrigation and hence high migration, and also are very relatively remote. So, but they all have kind of the same distance to the city. So, the whole idea is to compare villages that are similar. But have more or less NREGA employment.
And
so that's the idea.
Good that you have excluded Gujarat and
Yes.
compared Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, which are much more administratively, they are similar.
They're much more similar. Yes.
And not only NREGA, so for other entitlements also. In fact, like Anganwadi and primary school, these factors are becoming very important in taking up decisions in staying up the village. Not only NREGA. So you have to, in fact, take this into account. I stop there.
Okay. So, is there any? Okay. Thank you, Professor Sir. Now, I would like to give some conclusive and NREGA. See, as Mr. Clement claimed that northeastern states and northern states are having more migration, and western states and that Madhya Pradesh is having less. So in these connections, I would like to tell that in northeastern states and northern states, the opportunity for creating jobs under NREGA, especially in earthwork, is very limited. The reason is that fallow land, when compared to Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan and Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, it's less. And secondly, as I found that the perennial irrigation is also very less. So now another point I would like to express in this, job opportunities are, as as Mr. Roy stated that there is a lot of taboo for sending the women for earthwork and all. So for this, there is a alternative solutions that if you go for agroforestry and social forestry and all, so those problems can be solved. And secondly, as as of now, so in northern part of the country, if we take up that agroforestry and social forestry, we can intensify the afforestation area also, because when compared to the all India average, it is a 23% in all India average, whereas in northern state it's less than 12%. So that that problem we can solve. And also we can provide consistently this employment for these women, and also we can ensure the assets which can yield sustainable employment generation in due course in agro industries and all. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the discussion and the questions, and we'll talk about it later.